Now, Professor André Laks on Socrates in the Laws.
Thank you very much, Don. So basically, I will read from my paper. So Don's invitation gave me the opportunity to link two questions that I have been exploring over the years. What Socrates is the name of is the point of departure of my book, The Concept of Pre-Socratic Philosophy, that Don just mentioned, which was published in 2018 in Glenn Most's translation. And one novelty of our joint 2016 Loeb edition, Early Greek Philosophy, consists indeed in having added Socrates to the usual company. On the other hand, I have just sent to the press the manuscript of a book entitled Plato's Eumenides, an essay on his laws, in which I revisit my former contributions to the topic. What I will present today, however, and contrary to what Don just said, is not part of this book. It is a sketch that has been prompted by Don's invitation, for which I am extremely grateful. So a sketch means that I won't go into detailed textual discussion. I'm just throwing out some thoughts that I think can be discussed, and I hope that they will be discussed because it can lead me more deeply into the matter. I begin with a few words, however, about Socrates' presence in the Loeb edition. In his introduction to the Cambridge Companion to Early Greek Philosophy, Tony Long explained more than 20 years ago why he preferred not to call the Cambridge Companion to Pre-Socratic philosophy. But the collection itself did not include a chapter on Socrates. Christopher Taylor's 2006 article, Socrates the Sophist, was not concerned with editorial questions, but it provided good arguments for thinking about Socrates as a sophist of a certain kind. So did Noboru Naomi in his 2008 paper, Socrates versus Sophists, Plato's Invention, and in his recent talk at the ISSS last September, which was called Socrates and the Sophists Reconsidering His Position in the 5th Century Before Christ, he listed a series of arguments that supported our inclusion of Socrates in the collection. These arguments, all the titles that I am referring to, you will find in the bibliography. These arguments, all of which are well taken, are based on homogeneity, chronological homogeneity, and homogeneity of issues, including the reflection about forms of discursivity, like refutation, argumentation, and even rhetoric. Of course, putting Socrates next to the traditional sophists was not meant to reduce his radical heterogeneity, not to deny the relevance of the label pre-Socratic in appropriate contexts. A beginning, by definition, belongs to the past and to the future at once, which is the reason why beginnings, generally speaking, it's such an interesting concept, both from a historical and from a philosophical point of view. In any case, Socrates' presence in the Loeb is fully compatible with the claim that he in fact introduces a radical break in ancient Greek thought. The same could be said, in parentheses, about Parmenides. This being said, what does it mean to talk about Socrates in Plato's Laws, as my title goes? And it's interesting that I had some intrigued reactions done last time, and I received a pair of emails which were stunned about the proposal. The surprise comes, of course, from the fact that Socrates is conspicuously absent from the Laws. Indeed, it is the only Platonic dialogue where Socrates does not feature either as the main speaker nor as an interlocutor. Now, I could say that the most important word in my title is the preposition in. It prompts the question of what it means to be included, or for that matter, not being included somewhere. What I have in mind, in fact, is something very simple, namely that Socrates is haunting the work from which he is officially absent in more than one way. And this is the way in which he is doing so that interests me here. One reason of my interest, although it's not the only one, is that the issue involves in one crucial respect the pre-Socratic Socrates of Aristophanes Clouds, and thus provides yet another argument for the editorial decision taken in the Loeb collection. Let me add, since I won't have time to come back to this, that the relationship between Socrates, Aristophanes, and the laws has, in the recent past, recovered a vivid political actuality. The link between caricature, rumor, theological views, censorship, and condemnation to death are back with us in their terrible modern versions. This gives an additional depth to the question of the disappearance of Socrates' name in the laws and explains the mention of, in my bibliography, of brothers Karamazov and Cornford article on my handout. And if you want, we can come back to this aspect of the question in the discussion. But in is not the only important word in my title. There is also the related question raised by the proper name Socrates. For Socrates can refer to the Socrates who, according to alien story that you can read in T1, attended the performance of Aristophanes Clouds and stood up among the audience with his finger pointed to Socrates on stage, inhaling intelligence in his basket in order to better study the heavens. Socrates' name, more generally, may refer to any possible staging of Socrates, a historical figure characterized by a very special kind of plasticity, which is the term that Michela Sassi, which I saw is in the audience, put at the center of her inquiry about Socrates, published in Italian in 2015. Plato, in this respect, does not differ much from Aristophanes. Now, we don't have the possibility in our vernacular languages, not even in Italian, I think, to reflect Aristotle's implicit distinction, according to Fitzgerald's canon, between Socrates, the so-called historical one, and Ho Socrates, Plato's character, with the Greek article before the proper name. In order to distinguish between the two, we must use terms such as Plato's Socrates in speaking or quotation marks in writing. Of course, Fitzgerald's canon doesn't seem to be of any relevance to the laws since, again, there is no character called Socrates there. Or is there? In Politics 2.6, after having criticized at some length Plato's Republic on points that are relevant to his own project, Aristotle turns to the laws. And here is what he writes in text T2. Now, it is true that all the discourse of Socrates, to Socrates, possess brilliance, cleverness, originality, and keenness of inquiry. And Aristotle is talking about the laws. But it is no doubt difficult to be right about everything. And then follows a criticism about Plato's views, of Plato's views about the disproportion in Plato's second city, the city of the laws, between the small size of its territory and the number of its citizens. Socrates' name recurs twice later in T3 and T4, you can have a look at it. It's talking about the laws, and I don't read them aloud. Aristotle is, of course, mistaken from a factual point of view, for the main speaker of the laws is not Socrates, but the Athenian stranger. How do we deal with this mistake? Some options are more interesting than others. First option, there is a view, I think that it's Morrow's view, but I didn't have the opportunity to check. In any case, there is a view, according to which Aristotle read a version of the laws that differs from the one we have. I couldn't check either whether Aristotle's reference to Socrates counts as an argument to support the existence of a draft that has not survived, but it's a possibility. Second option, Aristotle may have committed a trivial but understandable slip. For he has been criticizing in some details from chapter 2 of book 6 to chapter 5, what he calls Socrates' proposals in Plato's Republic. At the beginning of chapter 6, he then turns to the laws, the constitution of which he wants to tackle, as he says, more briefly, because he considers it to be very close, paraplesios, to what Plato says in the Republic. And here is what he says in T5. This constitution, which Plato had intended to make more of the ordinary type, he gradually brings round to the other form. For with the exception of the community of women and property, he supposes everything to be the same in both states. There is to be the same education, the citizens of both are to live free from servile occupations, and there are to be common meals in both. The only difference with the laws, the only difference is that in the laws, the common meals are extended to women, and the warriors number 5,000, but in the Republic, only 1,000. End of the quote. Given the assumption of proximity between the two works, isn't it psychologically plausible then that Socrates, the main speaker in the Republic, just lingers in Aristotle's mind when he turns to the laws? This scenario cannot be excluded, of course. But what if Aristotle did really think of the stranger coming from Athens in terms of ho Socrates, Plato's usual main speaker, just anonymized? This is no less speculative than the psychological explanation, but I think much more interesting. To be sure, there are contingent reasons from a literary point of view why not only Socrates, but ho Socrates wouldn't conveniently feature in the laws. Socrates, without or with article, doesn't travel, and is even less likely to have traveled as an old man, as requested by the laws, one presupposition of which is that old age is the appropriate period of life to discuss legislation in an appropriate way. If we are looking for a better candidate than Socrates behind the Athenian stranger, is it not Plato himself then? But what does this mean? Plato is no less absent as a character from the laws than from any other of his dialogues, where he is arguably represented by ho Socrates, as for example in the Republic, which is more than an example in the present context. I may add here, somewhat allusively, that the Phaedo has relevant things to say in this respect. There, uniquely in Plato's dialogues, Plato is mentioned in the prologue for his remarkable absence on Socrates' last day on account of his sickness. In a wonderful piece, Glenn Most has shown that Socrates' last words at the end of the dialogue, requesting the sacrifice of a cock for Asclepius, that's the name of his article, amounts to the prophetic recognition by Socrates that Plato will survive, and that he is only true philosophical heir. As a matter of fact, I shall suggest shortly why the Phaedo can be considered as an important step towards the official but superficial disappearance of Socrates in the laws. Let me elaborate a bit on this complex configuration. The Athenian stranger in the laws embodies a definite political orientation. He is in Crete to advocate a radical political and cultural synthesis between Cretan, Lacedaemonian, and Athenian institutions. Could this extremely ambitious program be attributed independently of literary plausibility, if not unto Socrates, at least to Socrates? As soon as we look at the problem from this angle, we realize that there is a sense in which Socrates, or Socrates, is all over the place in the laws. For example, in the sections of the dialogue devoted to the unity of virtue, thematized in book 1, 2, at the beginning of the work, and then again at the end in book 12, in its treatment of the principle nobody does evil voluntarily, which it endorses in a dauntingly obscure passage of book 9, in what it says all along about the question of obedience to the law. Here, I shall restrict myself to briefly touch upon 3 other topics. First, the use of the word elenkos, or the verb elenkein, and the expression giving an account. Then, the characterization of a good life. And finally, I will say something about the theo- and teleological worldview, which is where Aristophanes Clouds and pre-Socratic philosophy comes in again. So first, some remarks about elenkos, elenkein in the laws. So I've distinguished 3 uses. In the majority of cases, the verb is used in the sense of putting something or somebody to test. For example, in the context of the dokimasia of the office holders in charge of checking the conduct of other office holders, the so-called eutunoi, the auditors. You will find further examples of the very common use in text 6 to 8, which I won't read. And there are more of it in the course of the work. In one passage of book 11, and I think I haven't quoted the passage on the handout, elenkein and kydred words with 3 or 4 occurrences clearly means show, report, in the sense of denouncing. So show a culprit or show somebody, denounce somebody to the responsible office holder. This is a much discussed occurrence of elenkein, but it's clearly the sense. Then there is the distinctively Socratic meaning, refute or show by refuting, that occurs only twice, I think, in the work, like the word philosophia, by the way, but this in 2 strategic places. The first passage is my T10. It comes from the general preamble to the laws that describes the best life. The stranger is blaming the weakness of those who think that life, to Zen, is an absolute good, pantos agathon, and consequently are afraid of dying. And here is the text. The Athenian stranger says, "For when his soul thinks that all what happens in Hades is bad, he yields to it, that is to his soul, and does not resist it by teaching it, didaskon, and showing, probably by refutation, elenkon, that it does not even know, with the typical formula ukoiden udei, if what comes with the gods that are there is not, on the contrary, by nature, the greatest of all goods. By the way, the translations I am giving are my translation in the rule. They are in the course of revision by English speakers, because of course translating, for me to write in English is already a pain in the neck, so translating Plato's laws in English is even more of it. So there might be mistakes and so on. The second passage is my T11, which raises interesting questions of translation, interpretation, to which we may return in the discussion, and which I just read. So in Book 10, the prescriptions pertaining to the laws which are set down in writing, as if they were to provide proof for all time, and here Pangel has so as to provide opportunity for questioning, are entirely immobile. As a result, if they are difficult to listen to at the beginning, there is no need to fear, so long as the slow learner can go and examine them often. These Socratic uses of elenkein lead directly to two related and much quoted, but I think not fully appreciated passages that bear on the relationship between legislation and medicine. Plato gives there a new version of the privileged relationship between politics, in the present case legislation, and medicine, that constitutes the red thread of his political views throughout his corpus, not notably in the Gorgias and in the Statesman. In this case, in the case of the laws, the parallel involves two kinds of doctors and two kinds of patients, depending on whether they are statutorily free citizens or slaves. The main point of the parallel is that the free doctor cures free men and exercises persuasion in a way that implies explanation and argumentation rather than that compulsion, whereas slave doctors use bare commands as tyrants do. In 2:12 and 2:13, I have put in bold the sentences that are relevant in the present context. In T12, we first get the idea that the lawgiver should, I quote, add a piece of exhortation and persuasion to the laws he has formulated. It then turns out that this persuasion would in some sense imply, by contrast with slave practice, the, I quote, giving or receiving an account, logon didosikai apodeketai, of each illness afflicting the patient. Then, at the end of T12, it is said that the free doctor, I quote, again, investigates these, namely the diseases, from the beginning, excitatson ex arches, and according to nature, sharing with the patient himself and his friends, and that he both learns something himself from the ailing relatives, and as much as he is able to, teaches the sick person and doesn't give orders until he has in some way persuaded her. And then comes T13, the parallel passage in book 9, which I read entirely because I think it's absolutely crucial to the whole construction of the laws. We didn't make a bad comparison when we compared all those who are now living under laws to slaves being cured by slaves. There is no doubt that if one of those doctors who practices medicine on the basis of experience, non-accompanied with justification, should ever come across a free doctor carrying on a dialogue with a free person who was sick and using arguments that come close to philosophizing, that is one of the occurrences of the word in the work, grasping the disease from its origin, exarches, and regressing until the nature of bodies as a whole, he would quickly burst out laughing and would say nothing other than the words that most of the so-called doctors always have ready at hand. For he would declare, "You stupid fellow, you are not curing the sick patient. Instead, you are almost educating him, as if what he needed were to become a doctor rather than healthy." This is a very tricky, difficult passage. I won't go into the detail. The comparison between two different medical and legislative practices is meant to clarify the notion of a legislative preamble. There is a slavish and a free manner to exercise legislation, exactly as there is a slavish and a free manner to exercise medicine. As I have argued in the past and further argue in my forthcoming Plato Eumenides, there is from book 4 to book 9 a crucial, that is from T12 to 213, a crucial conceptual crescendo. Book 4 only says that the lawgiver should persuade the citizen rather than give a simple order, in the same way that free doctors undertake to persuade their patients to follow their prescription. Otherwise, they would act in a slavish way, which amounts to using violence and so to acting tyrannically. Book 9 goes much further in that the kind of persuasion that the physician is supposed to exercise is, if not properly philosophical, since we are still in the domain of medicine, at least closed to philosophy, engus to philosophein. What this persuasion exactly amounts to and how close to philosophy it is not further explicated, but it is clear that the process is first conversational or dialogical, and that it has, potentially at least, an argumentative and therefore rational dimension, a feature that is at best suggested in the twin passage of Book 4. In other terms, Book 9 develops a radicalized version of what free medicine, and hence free legislation, should be, ultimately or virtually pointing to a fully rational, didactic, and in some sense Socratic education to virtue. This looks like a Socratic program directed to free men, and the slave doctor reacts accordingly by bursting out in laughter. Whether real free men would not do the same is another question. Good. My second example is about the representation of good life. I shall be brief on this example. It is taken from the address to the colonists that serves as the general preamble to the laws. The address consists for its most part of a long catalogue of prescriptions. The prescriptions are divided into two distinct categories. They concern either one's relationships, homilemata, or one's qualities and character. The section that interests us in the first place here deals with a very special kind of relationship, namely the relationship that one entertains with his own soul, which is called our most proper good. The citizen of Magnesia is asked to treat his soul in such a way as truly honor it, timan, that is, as its divine nature requires, and to thereby make it stronger, auxein. The Athenian Stranger lists 7 ways in which one can inappropriately honor his soul and thus harm it. You have them on the handout, the 7 manners of harming one's souls. by arbitrary exercise of the will based on the presumption of to be able to judge everything by oneself, by complacency leading to shifting responsibility on someone else, by abandoning oneself to pleasure, by avoiding toils, by overvaluing life and fearing death, by neglecting virtue in favor of beauty, by loving riches, which leads to injustice. All these negative behaviors constitute ways of going against the four official Platonic virtues. As Conrad Geiser has long ago pointed out, they negatively draw, by way of contrast, a typically Socratic profile. One could say that the paradigmatic citizen of Plato's so-called second best city is Socrates realized, ready to become the model of virtue, not necessarily linked to his Elenctic dialectic, that he was soon to become in the Hellenistic schools. I come to my last example, the one that involves the pre-Socratics, and which is, for me, the most difficult and but also the most interesting. And I'll be very sketchy because, again, I don't want to enter, or I don't have time to go into the details of the arguments or the text. But these texts are very well known, and I think we can discuss about them in a sketchy way, just for the sake of discussion. So, as is well known, Plato's present in Book 10 of the Laws an argument for the existence of the gods. The first known instance of the physical theological proof that Aristotle was soon to reshape in Metaphysics Lambda. The argument relies on two moves. First, a reconceptualization of the term physis, taken in Law 10, as it will be in Aristotle, to be the source of movement, which makes of the soul, psyche, the natural entity by excellence. The second move consists in the assumption that cosmic movements, insofar they are ordered, depends on a soul of a certain kind, let's call it a noetic soul, which organizes the world as a providential craftsman does, and not on the random processes of bodily items. The providentialist argument has an ethical import. Souls go after the death of a living being, wherever their life leads them, in virtue of a complicated cosmic mechanism, the details of which are difficult to fathom. But the overall sense is beyond doubt. The cosmic mechanism makes that judgment is automatic, or rather, that there is no need for any judgment. If every part, animated or not, is a function of the whole, given the providential organization of the whole, judgment becomes redundant, God's judgment. How close and how far is Socrates from this providentialist cosmology and from this eschatology? Our ancient sources tells us one of two things. Socrates either never engaged in natural inquiry, this is Plato's Apology or Xenophon, or if he did, that was only in his youth, that is the Phaedo. We may be tempted to construe the first option, namely that Socrates never engaged in natural inquiry, as an apologetic hyperbole, I don't know how you say that, although we may readily admit that Socrates never engaged properly or seriously in specialized cosmological research, which of course doesn't mean that he couldn't raise philosophical questions about the practice, as he did in his youth, according to the Phaedo. By the same token, the view according to which young Socrates began with cosmological and physiological questions is quite plausible, if only because someone's intellectual life has to start somewhere before going somewhere else. In this case, Socrates, as the doxography tells us, began with Archelaus. That's the Diogenes Laertius passage is given in T14. Now, it is important to realize that Plato's mature Socrates in the Phaedo remains a would-be natural philosopher at the very moment where he gets away from Anaxagoras and engages in his second journey in search of what he calls the cause, with, if you want, a capital A or a capital C. He tes aetias cetesis is the expression of 1991. The forms, whatever their causality might consist in, are requested to explain how the cosmos works. The Timaeus delivers the expected follow-up of the Phaedo. This Platonic line of thought is, of course, in agreement at a high but important degree of generality with Xenophon's teleological chapters in Memorabilia 1.4 and 3.4, or 1, there must be a mistake, I think, which David Sedley has aptly characterized in his 2008 article with the following sentence that you have on the handout. In Xenophon's historically plausible report, Socrates couples his theological forthrightness, meaning God's teleological providentialism in organizing the world, with an impressive self-restraint about physical theorizing. It is interesting to speculate about why Socrates did not engage in astronomical inquiry, even though he was, so to speak, structurally concerned with what such an inquiry could bring. The question can be answered in more than one way. Piety might be at stake, as later on in Augustine's condemnation of curiositas. It may also be that there are more important things to do given the span of human life and the requirements of the task than engage in derivative questions. To secure the good and the fine as the top philosophical reflection is enough of a job. In any case, Socrates' general cosmo-teleological conception would certainly not be weakened if it was supported by particular explanations. This is the contribution of the Timaeus, even if Socrates shuns there to be its exponent. For in the Timaeus, Socrates is pictured, if not as a stranger in a topological sense, as in a topological sense, since the dialogue takes place in Athens, at least as a stranger to the discipline that is requested in order to give the wished follow-up to the Republic. He is not the cosmologist. He is not a cosmologist like Timaeus, and he doesn't possess the historical memory of Critias. This is T15. Go on with your speech then, and good luck. It's my turn now to sit back and listen to your speeches that pay back mine of yesterday, meaning something like the Republic. And Critias replies, all right, Socrates, why do you think of the plan we have arranged for you for our guest gift to you? We thought that because Timaeus is our expert in astronomy and has made in his main business to know the nature of the universe, he should speak first, beginning with the origin of the universe and concluding with the nature of human beings. Then I will go next, once I'm in possession of Timaeus' account of the origin of human beings and your account of how some of them came to have a superior education. In the laws, the cosmological, theological, and teleological foundation of ethics develops against a falsely naturalistic model that destroys true legislation. This is the point of Aristophanes Clouds too, including its prophetic intuition of Socrates' condemnation. As a matter of fact, in the preamble to his law against impiety, Plato takes up the scheme on which Aristophanes Clouds is based and reverses its meaning and implications. Cosmos and legislation alike are controlled by insightful reason. I would have loved to wrap up this presentation by saying something about an argument that has been put forward by Silvia Fazzo and Gabor Beteg, according to which the thinker that stands behind Socrates in the first part of Aristophanes Clouds is Archelaus, rather than Diogenes of Apollonia, and about the extremely attractive hypothesis then defended by Gabor Beteg in a further article, according to which Archelaus is in fact behind not only the bipartite construction of Aristophanes Clouds, that is not only the first cosmological part, but also the relationship to the second one. So that Archelaus is in fact behind, not only behind the bipartite construction of Aristophanes Clouds, but that is also the one which is behind the cosmo-legislative doctrine attacked by Plato in the Laws. For Archelaus, as already mentioned, was a natural philosopher who also taught that law is by convention, not by nature. And he was also, of course, Socrates' teachers, as T14 tells us. But this extremely complex question would be really too much for today. And it's, and so I am really ending my talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll clap on behalf of all the muted people. Now we move to discussion. I invite you to raise your hands using the raise your hand function, and to ask a question or make a comment. Gregory Scott.
Hi, Andre, I'm very happy that you brought up book 10 because it forced me to go back and reread it and look at some passages. And first of all, can you hear me? I want to make sure that my audio.
Yes. Okay. I hear you. I don't see you though.
Oh yeah, well, you don't want to see me.
Okay, good.
So I have one question about which relates to your concern about Socrates as, you know, the Athenian stranger, perhaps, and then I have one that's related to that for my own interest. So let me give you an analogy. Winemakers often like to make a pure wine, Cabernet Sauvignon, right? And this is often considered the best, but sometimes people blend a wine and they'll take Cabernet with, say, Mourvedre. Is it not possible that the Athenian stranger is really just a fictional blend of the best thinking of both Plato and some Socrates?
Let me answer this one first. Yes, that's, I think, exactly, well, it depends what you call blend, but it's what basically what I meant with when I pointed out, I think, that the term "ho Socrates" in the use that if we accept Fitzgerald canon, with the distinction between, you know, Socrates and the fictional Socrates. So the idea that the fiction in the fictional Socrates is that the Athenian stranger actually is, as far as content is concerned, not as far as settings is concerned, but as far as contents is concerned, is one possible, interesting, logical, expected figure of manifestation of Socrates in Plato, of course, hence, that means reshaped by Plato. So that, I mean, the idea is very simple, is that Socrates is not absent from the laws, although he's absent from the laws. That's all what I wanted to say. And that you can explain his absence by all kinds of considerations, including literary or mainly by literary considerations. The negative one, I have alluded to Socrates' old age or Socrates not traveling and so on, but also by positive considerations. I had just one in mind that escapes me, but that basically is there, and that we should read the laws with Socrates in mind. And the further suggestion was that it's exactly what Aristotle did, and rightly so, even if we think that he committed some kind of material mistake. So this is this, no, so yes, my answer to you is yes.
So why not a blend of three, given what you yourself said about Aristotle? I mean, if one of the reasons I appreciated having to go back and read book 10 is I see right before the attempt to prove that God exists, the Athenian Stranger, who again, I think is this fictional character, which I agree with you. There could be Socrates in it. There could be Plato in it. It seems to be the fictional embodiment of what good Athenian thinking is. Why would that not be then also some Aristotle in there? Given, I can give you different passages where it seems as if Plato has changed his views in response to his great student. And when you look at how long Aristotle has been in the school already and how late the laws is, why couldn't this blend, this fictional character called the Athenian Stranger, not only be the primarily the views of Plato, he's 70%, some views of Socrates, but also a little bit of Aristotle, given the how.
No, I totally agree with you, apart from the fact that it is improvable. Actually, in my book, I mean, there is also the question of the relationship between the poetics and there are some passages. I don't know if it's one of the passages that you have in mind, but the definition of that Plato gives of the best tragedy in 7 is obviously in relationship with Aristotle's definition of tragedy. The question is that, you know, it's a moot question. How does the influence goes? Because chronologically it is possible. Aristotle was a student thereby, or was already in Plato, with Plato for a long time. But what has been going on between them? I mean, it's not as if they read each other works. The reality of it is that they were, each day in contact with one another. So, I mean, there is no way in which we can decide in which direction it goes. To my mind, I think that Aristotle is dependent on Plato rather than the other way around. But you can build stories, around these are hypotheses. It's not, to diminish their interest. They are interests, but to settle the question seems to me really impossible, and the impossibility seems to be an interesting result. It's not, just renouncement. It's just that, dialectical discussion and how do we write our articles, right? I mean, will you influence me or not, or shall I influence you? It's difficult to say.
So I don't want to take too much time. I have one precise question then.
I think we should move on. If it's, we've got quite a few people. If it's all right, please.
Sure.
There's
But do email me if you want.
There's a question up in the chat from Marijana Rico. She's interested in Archelaus and asks why, in your opinion, is he never actually mentioned by Plato or Xenophon? Instead, they seem to represent Socrates as self-taught.
Instead, they sorry?
They represent Socrates as self-taught, as a self-taught philosopher. So she says.
Well,
that Archelaus is not mentioned.
Yeah. Well, part of the answer, I guess, is that there is an apologetic dimension to. Part of the answer is that Plato doesn't mention anybody. He doesn't mention. I mean, he mentions Anaxagoras, but not in the laws. But he points to him. He uses his expression, but he doesn't use proper names. He doesn't mention Democritus. So the politics of naming and not naming is extremely complicated in every ancient authors and in Plato in general. And so the other part of the answer, I guess, is that there is this strategic interest of cutting all the possible links between Socrates and pre-Socratic, let's say, physics in an apologetic perspective. And then there is the question of whether the doxography is building up something or reporting something. So it's not as if the doxography was neutral either in its reports. Actually, if you study closely Diogenes Laertius' reports, you will see that this is actually a question that involves Gabor's thesis about Archelaus being this one main central person behind the whole issue. The doxography is cautious. The doxography says he seems to have been the pupil of, well, Socrates seems to have been, or a certain person thinks that he has been the pupil of Archelaus. So there is there are interests behind any single report or absence of report. And in order to understand the report and to appreciate the reports, you must be in a position, which sometimes we are and sometimes we are not, to reconstruct what are the interests, intellectual or otherwise, that are behind these reports. And actually this is one of the most interesting things to do with with these kinds of ancient material. So, so the question is important. I can't tell more right now, but we must, the simple answer is that we must relativize the value of almost any information that we have.
All right. Another question, Amanda Green.
Hello.
Hello, Amanda.
Hi, I want to ask, thank you for the paper, and I want to ask about T1.
Good.
So I appreciated knowing about this account because it's very entertaining, and also it gives us this sense of Socrates resisting the idea of being masked. I mean, in the story, that the masks are supposed to be, they're supposed to have an excellent likeness, but because there are foreigners in the audience and they didn't know who was being made fun of, Socrates stands up the whole time to identify himself. And it strikes me that this just rings true with how we think of Socrates' character, that he would do something like this. So I want to ask you to comment more on this passage, because as the rest of your paper went on, I understood you to be arguing that there are sort of three aspects in which we can understand the Athenian stranger as ho Socrates. One is the emphasis on elenkein, and the other is the emphasis on the role, one's relationship with one's soul as critical for the good life, and the third one was the cosmology. And I found it persuasive that these are three aspects in which the Athenian stranger's presentation has echoes of things that are characteristically Socratic. But in fact, if that's true, then what's happening is the Athenian stranger is presenting themselves as a masked Socrates. And then I want to ask you, isn't the Socratic thing to do for Socrates to come out and identify himself? And so in a way, this is an unsocratic way of presenting Socrates.
Yes, absolutely. This is absolutely true. But first, this is the whole point of the story that Glenn explanation, or I mean, it's the implication. He doesn't speak about this, but this is the implication of the story. Of the Phaedo, Plato is sick, but he will be saved. So we must sacrifice a cock to Asclepius, and I am the only one who is the real heir of Socrates. Now, to be the heir of Socrates means to get rid of Socrates, and this is the second, the one dimension of the talk of the thought that I didn't develop, is that there is a more profound reason for the disappearance of Socrates as a character from the laws than the simple literary necessity or plausibility. Is that and this is I think very important. It's trivial in a sense, but it's also very important, is that Socrates realized, I mean, the content of Socrates' teaching being realized, concretized in a city, in a given city, means that Socrates is not useful, necessary, possible anymore. In the city of the laws, you won't have any Socrates, because Socrates is linked to the kind of city that can generate figures like Socrates. If you have a city where there is no reason why a Socrates would have to intervene because of education, because of whatever. So it's it's Socrates' self-disappearance. I find it, so it's not, what I mean is not contingent from this point of view. So I've talked about the literary side, and we can say this is contingent, but what is not contingent is that the city doesn't, and that's the whole point of Cornford, and that gives me the opportunity to add to add this to what I said, and to explain the allusion in his very important, I think, article, Plato's Commonwealth. Cornford refers to this, to the fable of the great inquisitor in Brothers Karamazov. So the idea is you have the Christ and you have the great inquisitor, and the last person that the great inquisitor, which is at the head of the church, or I mean, caring for the church, wants is a return of Socrates, of the Christ. And so Cornford draws the parallel between the situation that exists between the relationship between the Christ and the Great Inquisitor and Socrates and Plato. Now, this is, of course, this is, emphatic, exaggerated, it can be criticized, it can be, but the structure, when you realize the wishes of somebody, the somebody is in danger of not being necessitated anymore and even to be troublesome, is a given, I think. And so this is the strong, let's say, interpretation of the disappearance of Socrates in the laws, which is not, contrary to Cornford, I wouldn't say that this implies, some kind of totalitarian state, because Cornford's idea is that really there is the parallel between the Inquisition and Plato's states in political terms, because Plato's laws are not exactly, in the terms of Cornford's, a state of liberty, which can be discussed on philosophical grounds also. It depends what you call liberty and so on. But that's the structural scheme. So, so yes, that's an answer to your question, I hope.
I think maybe we should move on. Chloe Ba.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I joined a little late, so I'm not sure whether you already suggested that, but do you see any connection between the Crito and the laws with regard to Socrates? I mean, laws.
Yes and no. So next to you is Christopher Moore, which has written an article which I don't quote here, but I agree with him in that basically, you will correct me, Christopher, if I am wrong, but basically the idea is that the Crito is not philosophically I mean, the last word of Plato on the subject of obedience to the laws. I don't recall the exactly Christopher's argument, but again, the main difference, I think, is that, so yes, there is a relationship between because of the topic. Now, what distinguishes the situation of the Crito from the situation of the laws is that the Crito must found reasons to obey the laws that are founded on the belonging to a state which is, let's say, unjust. This is not the case of the laws, where obedience again supposes the kind of state that is very different from the situation in the Crito. So yes, there is a difference, but so there is a relation, there is a difference, but it's not moving from one doctrine to another. Is that responding? It's just the two conceptions are corresponding to two different situations in the relationship of, in one case, Socrates to the Athenian state, and on the other hand, of the citizen of the laws to the second best city.
So not as a challenge that the Crito introduces, but rather as contextualized within the Athenian state, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the way I would go. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Christopher Moore.
Well, thanks, Andre, very much. My question, you started addressing it in the second half of your response to Amanda Green, and it's a question of clarification about the stakes of your claim, or what the dialectic, what the argument is, because I'm a little bit unclear still, because some of this evidence that you're showing in T1 through et cetera suggests that Plato is influenced by Socrates in his writing. And that seems unexceptionable to me, and I'm sure unexceptionable to you as well. And it seems surprising over many hundreds of pages, if Plato chooses a character other than Socrates, at least nominally, to be the primary conversation leader, that he would be able to scrub all kinds of statements that would smack of Socratism. So I suppose I want to know what's going on. And here's a further question, and this is brought up to me by the introduction, Don's introduction, and to some extent your own, and that is positioning Socrates within this sophistic climate or intellectual climate of the 5th century, where maybe it's difficult, maybe you don't think it's difficult, but maybe it is difficult to identify a distinctively Socratic use of elenchane. It seems like it was pretty broadly used among the people in a range of ways, and similarly, a distinctively Socratic attitude toward teleology versus natural science. So I mean, I guess then that is a kind of second question. Are you saying that it is quite possible to identify distinctively Socratic statements in the laws that we could be pretty sure could not be attributed to the kinds of things that a character Plato would depict, who's not Socrates, would talk about? So, those are just the kinds of thoughts I have, trying to understand what you're trying to accomplish.
Sorry, Christopher, can you repeat just the last part of your question about the kind of statements that could not be attributed to whom?
To people other than Socrates. So what I just very briefly, so it struck me that one thing you're trying to show, for example, with texts 10 and 11, that this use of elenchane is distinctively Socratic, that in text 12, the giving and receiving of reasons, logon didonai, is a kind of distinctly Socratic thing, such that then we have tags or markers of Socratism within the laws. So I suppose then there's this two-part question, perhaps. Why should we, besides the question, can we actually identify markers of Socratism in this text, given that these kinds of statements could be used by other people potentially? And if we did find markers of Socratism, what would that establish?
Okay, so now I understand the question. So my answer, it's difficult to have an extended discussion on that, but to state my position. Yes, I think that there are markers of Socratism. Yes, I think that that these markers of Socratism are all over the place. They hide in words, elenchane, in phrases. Nobody is responsible for acting for evil. Of course, the fact that these there are thousands of them. The theory of pleasure, the theory of virtue, etc. All of it is there. The fact that there are markers of Socrates rather than markers of the common language, that's your question, I think, is due to the fact that it is Plato that uses these markers. So you are right. This presupposes the recognition of markers depends on the kind of relationship that we establish between Socrates and Plato. And here, I think it's really trivial to say that, as you said, in I mean, in someone relaxed with a relaxed language, that Socrates influenced Socrates. That is the least that you can say. But then there is what is at stake is, of course, reshaping, remodeling, reconstructing the arguments, elaborating. I mean, you have more than one interpretation of nobody is how do you say that is in English? Nobody is or acts wrong voluntarily, does wrong voluntarily. You have more than one interpretation in Plato of this formula, but the formula is distinctive of Socrates in Plato's hand, even if there are other authors that could have used them. Is that an answer to this question, or to this part of your question?
So you're saying that if we did not recognize these markers as Socratic, we would not be able to interpret the dialogue in the correct way.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, maybe I can allow myself to ask a question or make a comment. When you get to Socrates is there in thousands of places, I start to worry that what you've got in thousands of places is not Socrates, but other writings of Plato, right? You've got different strata and bits of Plato here in the laws. There's the famous question how you separate out Socrates from early Plato. But if one keeps in mind that Socrates was presumably in philosophical conversation with various people for 40 years, and then Plato with his students for more decades, and in status debate, status competition with Antisthenes and all this stuff. What you have is the residue of decades of philosophizing among the Socratic community, present in thousands of places. Or is that, or am I overstating it?
No, I don't know. That's fully possible. I have not studied the question. I know that the re-evaluation and the retrieving the so-called minor Socratics is a very valuable task and very difficult task, and that it may bring many interesting results. And I am open to that. It still seems to me very, let's say, classically, perhaps out of ignorance. If you give me examples, I will be glad to learn. But it seems to me that given the specific relationship that Plato is constructing between himself and Socrates, the other Socratics, important as they are not, let's be cautious, essential to the construction of what Plato is doing in the laws. That's, it may be that this material, this very fragmentary material, and the glimpses that we can have into the Socratic dialogues and Socratic discussion may shed some light about. But I am not doing. I am interested, as everybody is, in let's say in Quellenforschung. And I'm sure you can spot the same question applies to the laws, to the cosmological discourse of the laws. Archelaus, Diogenes of Apollonia, Democritus, whoever. I mean, Plato is a free mind, right? So he takes whatever he has and combines it for his extraordinary purposes. And so if we can spot references the better for the understanding of the whole thing. But I still think that this would not diminish the philosophical, the specific philosophical relationship between Socrates and Plato, which is again thematized by Plato himself, especially in the Phaedo, but not only.
Maria Sassi has a comment in the chat to everyone. Maria, would you like to sort of express that in your own words rather than having me paraphrase it? Would you like to speak up?
Okay, but while I was watching, trying to write down my question, I heard that André already answered to it. I mean, with which place Socrates' parousia may find in a city where parousia, free speech, is punished, and so on. But anyway, I would like to repeat that I fully appreciated a few points where André saw possible Socratic reminiscence, and I'm most interested to the text of the laws T12 and T13 concerning the medicine, concerning the figure of the free doctor and of the doctor of the slaves, because that's quite convincing to me, because I believe that Plato, in throughout all his work, is reprising from Socrates this analogy between medicine and care of the soul or of the polis, and so I would like André to tell us more on this passage. I want also ask if he thinks that there is a connection, a link between this passage of the laws and that passage in the Lakers. I don't know if I pronounce well the Platonic dialogue Lakers, where the elenkos is seen as an activity who invites the interlocutor of Socrates to review his past and his present and his future with a formula which recalls the description of the activity of the doctors through anamnesis and diagnosis and prognosis.
Thank you, Michela. I don't have in mind the passage of the Laches, so I won't answer you on that, but I will look it up. If you want really to know more about what I think about the doctor passage in the laws, you will have, unfortunately, to read my new book. It's extremely complicated because there is the question of how far goes the analogy, how justified the laughter of the slave doctor is, the relationship between the prescription of the doctor and the law, which comes after persuasion, the relationship between the deontic content of a statement and the command of the law, the form of the law. There are all kinds of problems that are really not that I can't go into right now. That would need taking the text and examining it. But yes, the sheer fact, the sheer recognition that I would go as far as saying that the real, philosophical interpretation of the laws depends on the way in which we interpret this passage. It's not that I am diminishing all the rest, but I think the momentum, really the nitty-gritty of the philosophical horizon is there. So
Yeah,
I will be glad to discuss that, you know.
yes,
further.
I agree that this is crucial point.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is crucial passage. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're running short on time. One last question, Maria Angelica Fierro.
Oh,
Hi, Maria.
hello, André.
Yeah.
How nice. Thank you very much. Well, my question is a bit on the same line as the last question you got, so maybe you will give me a similar answer. It was about text 12 and 13, and basically to know if the persuasion, this Socratic persuasion that should be used to convince someone to obey the laws would be just a dialectical discussion, or could be a philosophical rhetoric, which has also, or which has a big use also of other kind of devices, as what we find, I think, that's my interpretation, in the Phaedrus. Yes, if it's only philosophical dialectical explanation, or according to the patient, the citizen, you could use another kind of persuasion.
Yeah, I mean, the answer, or my answer is that it's both. But it may be so, and it is so in most of the case. In most of the case, we are in the Phaedrus case, but then there is a limit case. And the limit case is what I call, so let me explain that, because this is important. This is exactly what I call the legislative utopia. The legislative utopia is, so I use, you know, the word utopia because I am interested in the relationship between possibility and realization, so to speak. And I think that possibility and realization is the real interesting point in looking at the general relationship between the Republic and the laws. That's the first point. But my second point is that within the law, there is again, so within the second state, if you want, there is again a utopia, a second kind of utopia, of another kind of utopia. And this utopia is not a political utopia in the sense of the Republic, but it goes even beyond the Republic in re-evaluating and reinstalling the kind of dialectical conversation that is represented by Socrates, which is the limit of the, so dialogue as the limit of political relationship. And this is utopian. And since it is utopia, it's not going to be realized, probably not within even the second city, probably not. But it is a model that is, you know, if you want to explain it or to put it in Kantian terms, it's an ideal of reason. And to spot, to keep an eye on this ideal of reason within such a realistic work, or as the law is an important point of what the laws are doing. And this is why, in parentheses, in my new book, I dare say that the laws is really the most important of all Plato's political works, including the Republic. So some have been some have been startled with my titles, but there is more surprise to come.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, but you see the
yes,
relationship.
Utopically, you would use dialectic, but in reality, you might use other devices because you cannot convince
But just in order to clarify, my position is strictly, not strictly, because I think I cover it as well. But for example, Luc Brisson thinks in terms of there is this idea that the laws is a rhetorical work and that it's using rhetoric and that all this is simply rhetoric and so on and so on. And there is a lot of rhetoric in the laws as there is in general in Plato's work and as there is in the Phaedrus and so on and so on. So it's not to deny that, but it's not the unique form of discourse that is included in the political perspective, let's say. And Socrates is there somewhere as he has become a limit point, a legislative utopy. So that's the way I construe that.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Thanks, André.
All right. Well, thank you, André, for extremely rich and interesting and bold presentation. It's been good to see so many people from all over the world participating in this event, and I hope to see you at future colloquia. But thanks.
Thank you very much to all of you and to Don in particular. Thank you.